Newman Lim, otherwise known as Scuzzy Death, is from DC 604 in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and he's also and DC 416 in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Apparently, he gets around. He's also behind me as a giant talking head from Zardoz. Oh no, it's his first slide. Sorry, no longer a talking head. Um, uh, his talk is going to be frontline first aid, triaging your DFIR emergency response. Digital forensics and incident response, as well as other essential emergency workers, often face high stress levels and risk burnout due to their demanding roles. I can relate to that. I was in that role for a while. This talk is for professionals, spouses, managers, and corporations, and will cover the following topics: self-care, hacking health, maintaining work-life balance, building a support network, and developing mindfulness and relaxation techniques using technology to manage workload, working with management to create a positive work environment. Having built and led successful DFIR practices that dealt with some of Canada's largest data breaches, I wish to impart that I have what I have learned over the years so others may protect and nurture their most sacred resources, people. Newman Lim is a manager at Odlum, not sure which, Brown, where he leads the defense against criminals and state-sponsored actors targeting the financial industry. Prior to this role, Newman spent several years working with large enterprises and governments specializing in digital forensics and incident response, investigating some of Canada's largest data breaches from 2018 to 2023. With more than 15 years of InfoSec experience, he has delivered numerous cyber risk assessments, coordinated national incident responses across multiple industries. Newman has been invited to share his research and thought leadership at many security conferences such as Grey Hat, Con, DEF CON Blue Team Village, HTCIA, B-Sides Toronto, and CISO Summit and CCTX, and now DEF CON Group's VR. So we'd like to welcome Newman to the stage.
Hey, thank you, everyone. And it's good to be here. I am across the street from the main conference. I'm just going to basically move on to my very first slide here. And it's really just about myself. I think the introduction was fantastic. I couldn't have said it better myself. Hopefully that will kind of set us up for the rest of this talk, where we really try to focus on tips and strategies on how we as practitioners, as well as managers or corporate leaders, look at this particular issue in a more serious way, as well as come out of this talk with some good, good statistics as well as strategies to kind of deal with the problem. Because let's be honest, this is a problem that we're all trying to solve, and I don't believe anyone has a very good idea of how to solve it. So let's just start with, okay, well, why listen to this person chat about this? I've been a digital forensics consultant for probably most of my career. In 2018, I led CGI's Digital Forensics and Incident Response team. I built that team as well as the Digital Forensics Lab in the Toronto area. 2019, I became the Director of Digital Forensics and Incident Response at ISA. And then after that, in 2023, I was the Senior Manager of Detect and Response, also doing incident response for Deloitte, one of the big fours. During that time, I've dealt with some of the largest data breaches, helped our clients with not just the investigation, but also the remediation of some of these issues at hand. One of the main things that I wanted to kind of talk about today is legally, without prejudice, of course. Here are just some headlines of some of the casework that I may or may not have been involved. As we know, this is a major industry problem. And burnout within the cybersecurity industry is extremely high. A lot of our peers, as you can see in some of these social posts from various times, I think as far back as 2021, I've been talking about some of these issues that they've been facing, and these are some notables in our industry. Why is this such a major problem? Well, first of all, the constant threats that we face, these don't go away. In fact, they are getting worse, and in some cases, we're constantly dealing with evolving threats. I mean, the nature of the job really means that we are always on high alert for new types of attacks and vulnerabilities, and then therefore, it's unbelievably mentally exhausting. Um, in some cases, either we're working for government agencies or hospitals. It's a high stakes environment. The consequences of a security breach can be increasingly severe, not just impacting financial losses, but also you could also incur reputational damage or legal repercussions, and in some cases, even the loss of life. These high pressure environments contribute to a significant amount of stress, and therefore the burnout problem is quite high in those industries. Oftentimes, in order for us to stay ahead of the cyber threats, practitioners will work long hours, including long nights and weekends. I mean, let's be honest, the bad guys don't. They themselves don't rest, and they target people, sometimes in the middle of the night. So for that, we need to be constantly vigilant. And in rapid response, most of the times it can be very disruptive to work-life balance because, hey, you could get hit at 3 a.m. in the morning. Fourth one is I think we're no stranger to. We all know there's a skills shortage. It's difficult enough as it is to learn a lot of these investigative techniques. There's a significant gap in the way that institutions such as universities or colleges are teaching students today. And they're not really catching up with the amount of knowledge and skills that are required for what we need to do in the industry. And therefore, this skill shortage just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The complex and evolving threat landscape, as we know, the rapid pace of technology change really means that cybersecurity professionals have to constantly update their skills. Oftentimes, most folks will, do a 4-year degree, take a SANS course, and feel like that is enough for them to leverage to build their career, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that type of knowledge expires fairly quickly, given how quickly things change, such as new technologies, new abilities in cloud technologies, for example, as we start to move a lot of our on-prem systems away from what we have today to more modern technologies. And so the threat of change creates a stressful environment. And of course, incident response stress. As you well know, during cyber incidents, the pressure to act quickly and efficiently is immense. The stress of managing and mitigating cyber attacks, especially in the middle of one, often with a complete lack of resources, and of course the high stakes, especially if you're working for a hospital, can be extremely draining, not just physically, but also mentally as well. And last but not least, there's a huge lack of recognition and support for our industry. Oftentimes, I hear from practitioners; they keep saying things like, "Hey, this is a unbelievably thankless job," and it keeps reflecting it in that way. Organizations don't seem to recognize their staff enough that have basically worked all of these long hours. So, based on that, what can we do? First things first, I just want to call out my disclaimer. I'm not a medical professional. The information and opinions that I'm providing here today is based on my personal views and my experience. If you are suffering from some medical condition, please make sure that you consult with a qualified healthcare professional. The content here is really for educational and informational purposes and should not be a substitute for professional medical advice and treatment. So let's take a quick look at what is the definition of burnout. And now the World Health Organization has defined burnout as a occupational phenomenon or occupational I wouldn't call it an illness, it's more of a condition. And it's actually being recognized as a classification under diseases. So it is what they would consider a medical phenomenon. Burnout defined in ICD-11 is as follows. Burnout's a syndrome conceptualized as a result of chronic workplace stress that have not been successfully managed. And that's the key word here that they're trying to flesh out here, is that it has not been successfully managed. So that said, how can we as individuals, spouses, co-workers, managers manage this successfully? So here, the WHO has characterized three different dimensions: the feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's jobs, feelings, the reduced professional efficacy. Now, these are at a very high level, some of those symptoms. But as part of my presentation, I will take you through a lot more different symptoms on how to identify what could potentially constitute as burnout. So here in Canada, I just want everyone to know that organizations do have a responsibility to their employees, especially the well-being of their employees. And generally, these kind of fall into the following categories. So organizations are responsible for creating healthy work environments. We have physical safety requirements. We have to ensure that the workplace is safe and free from hazards that could cause physical harm. That said, there is also another category, what we call mental health support. Organizations must foster a work environment that supports mental well-being and reduce stigma around mental health issues. Organizations in Canada also must provide resources and support. So we do have things like employee assistance programs or EAPs. I believe this is the same in the US as well. They must offer access to offer access to counseling services, mental health resources, and support programs. Here in Canada, we have something very special. We call them mental health days. We're allowed to take a number of days off specifically for mental health needs, and that's been phenomenal because it does not take away from your sick days. And our regular sick leave here in Canada is, in BC in particular, is 5 days. We're given 5 days of sick days, and these mental health days are on top of that. Workplaces must allow for reasonable working hours in order for staff members to manage their workload and stress. So employers are regulated to maintain those. Do they follow them? I can tell you not too many do, but they are actually required to do so. Stress management, organizations are supposed to be following or allowing for the implementation of practices and programs that will help employees manage and reduce stress, such as providing training for stress management techniques. And organizations must also promote work-life balance, and these could include things like allowing for flexible work arrangements. But again, not every organization follows this. They must also allow for time off or have time off policies. And I think most corporations do follow that particular guideline. Organizations must also encourage open communications. In this particular case, they must support a corporate culture that creates an environment, a safe environment where employees feel comfortable discussing not just their physical, but also their mental health concerns. And they must also provide mechanisms to allow employees to voice concerns as well as suggest improvements to those policies and programs. One that is very important, and I can't stress enough, is really the training and awareness piece. Organizations are responsible for providing training for managers and employees as well on how to recognize the signs of physical and mental health issues, and also how that they can get support and help. So those EAP programs, for example, they need to have documentation as well as policies and procedures to say, here's how you can access all of these. There are some legal compliance in terms of what an organization is responsible for. There are some federal and provincial or state regulations regarding workplace health and safety. Um, if you do not follow these, you can be ordered by the government to adhere or meet those standards. Um, there are also accommodations given by law uh, for employees with mental health conditions, and these are required by law. So, say for example, if you have a staff member that has ADHD, for example, you must allow for accommodations within your workplace. And last but not least, employee engagement and support. There must be supports provided for employees for career development, as well as recognition and reward. Now, I can tell you a lot of companies don't actually follow that one, even though they are in the guidelines from an organization's responsibilities. So, of all of these that I've mentioned, I would say that most organizations probably adhere to about 75% of them, and they fall behind on about 25% of them. So we really, as employees, need to keep our organizations honest and make sure that they are doing what they have to do and following some of these legal guidelines. One thing I want to stress is there is a financial hit on having your employees suffer from burnout. When I was building some of my deferred practices in the big fours, we have a very quick calculation for me to basically drum up support from senior leadership to support staff members in the practice. On the left hand side, I've got a graph here that basically shows the ideal scenario for growth by determining a small pod or small incident response team or a quick response team of one senior with a couple of analysts, following the train the trainer trainee model. Um, if this model works the way that it should, the the economics behind that is a linear trajectory up. And for every senior with 3 analysts, um, they can generate quite a lot of revenue with extremely low cost as long as the seniors are providing most of the support to the junior analysts and there is rotation amongst the resources so that you don't hit the burnout stage. On the right hand side is a more realistic model of what usually happens in a deferred practice. So what happens is that the seniors or analysts start to burn out. They quit or they leave the organization, incurring a significant opportunity cost. And as such, organizations that suffer from this cannot take on any additional casework, causing loss of potential revenue. And if your senior quits in the middle of a case, there could be some potential reputational damage. Now, this is a very, very, very rough kind of a projection, economic projection. Typically, when I present to my leadership teams, I would have a lot more modeling behind it with actual numbers, cost, training, as well as how much a senior analyst or a consultant can actually generate in terms of revenue per case. So this is just for illustrations purposes. I want to show that, in an ideal scenario, it can be sustainable. It can be good business model. And on the right-hand side, the ideal is to basically avoid or try to flatten a lot of those curves that we see up there. So here I want to talk about the stress to performance. Now we have to understand that every individual has a different amount of capacity and a bit different ability to handle or take on stress. In this particular case, you're really starting to look at the optimal stress levels for each and every one of your team members. So I'll give you an example. At the higher echelon or the higher curve, that could be like a senior consultant. They may have more experience. They may have a better support structure. They may have more capacity to handle the stressful situations. A junior would maybe be at the lower curve. They do not have the capacity to handle as much of the workload. They tend to fall into, I guess, the stressful or the burnout stages a lot faster because their curve is at a much lower intensity. Now, in this particular model, what we're really trying to do is shift left as best as we can. Right. We really do not want to get into that red. Red would be all the red flags that would basically cause someone to not function anymore. And that's something that we are really trying to get out of. Now, if you start to see yourself in that stage, you really need to start looking at getting help. Because once you start taking on too much stress, sometimes it will overload your system. So the key here is to recognize where you are in this curve and try to bring yourself back left as best as you can. So how can you do that? And there are some methods that managers who are here that are attending this can implement in their organizations. So here are some of the ways that you could do. So what you could do is you could lead through some of this stress. And the key here is point number 5. What you're trying to do is you're trying to shoot for that sustainable best effort. Sorry about that. Yeah. And what you want to do throughout all of this is constantly check in with your staff members. Be curious at what's going on in their lives. Listen to them. During that times, make sure you talk about stress. Hey, how are people's stress levels going? As part of this presentation, I put together a checklist, which I took from a partner of mine. And the checklist is included as a PDF on the on stage, I believe, on the right-hand side of the stage, so that this is something that you can download. And it's really just a checklist for you to kind of go through what kind of stressors are in your life. So as managers, I would highly recommend that you put together some similar checklist so that you can talk to your staff about how they're feeling. What is their current stress level right now? And having that conversation as open as possible will really start to reduce some of those stress levels and at least help you identify. And then once you understand that there is an issue or a stress related issue, that you can start to look at managing it. As managers, and in some cases as part of the legal requirements or guidelines, it is your responsibility to manage your staff time as well. So look at um, how many hours each staff member is putting into their projects. Look at rotating them out if they are doing way too many hours per day. And last but not least, like really advocate and support for those EAP programs that will help reduce some of the stress. And last but not least, really try to focus on that sustainable best. So as employees or as people, how do we identify the stressors that will lead us to burnout? Now, the WHO has given us three factors. I think that is, I think, a very brief summary. I'm going to go into a lot more areas here that will help you identify what could potentially be an indicator. And the key here is really identifying those indicators. If you can find or identify these indicators ahead of time, it will allow you to have some strategies or tips that you can basically try to move left and mitigate some of this before it becomes a major issue. So the number one would be an emotional indicator. So things like chronic fatigue or feelings of tiredness, lack of energy, you don't want to get up in the morning and go to work. Those types of emotional indicators are very, very useful to identify that you are under stress and that you may potentially be facing a burnout situation. Other physical indicators such as sleep deprivation, headaches, muscle pain, and in some cases, major illnesses. And I can tell you from my own experience, in my second burnout, I actually had a doctor tell me that I need to stop working. My health cannot take, the 18 hours that I was pulling. And a medical professional, when a medical professional tells you that your work is causing you or creating illness, you need to stop. So that's my experience from that one. If you are developing health problems related to your current work, you need to seek medical help. And if the doctor tells you to stop, you've got to stop. Other behavioral indicators, things like decreased performance. As you start to work the long hours, there will be times where your performance will start to decrease, and it's just a function of the ability for you to do things, right? It's economies of scale. The longer hours you work, the more tired you become, the poorer the quality of your work. In some cases, the behavioral indicator is withdrawal. Effectively, you're so tired, you just don't want to do any more work, or you would start to push work that you would normally do off to other colleagues. So those are other indicators that you should be aware of. Cognitive indicators, concentration, and I can tell you that I've suffered from this quite a bit. Someone would tell me something. Typically, I have pretty good memory. I would memorize it, and I'd be able to bring it back out or regurgitate it, no problem. If I'm overworked or stressed, I have difficulty remembering things. And that's, like I said, another cognitive indicator. As you start to tire, your brain just stops, becoming very efficient. The next other indicator, changes in attitude. Oftentimes I have high performance staff members, and this is the same with me as well. We're typically very high performance folks. We're very enthusiastic about the work that we do. We want to keep hospitals safe. We want to protect government agencies. We're usually very enthusiastic about it. But when we hit that, once we cross the middle line and start going towards the right hand side, like our attitude starts to change. We lose our enthusiasm. We're not there 100% of the time. Our interest in doing the work that we love to do previously just isn't there anymore. And again, that affects, like I said, our productivity and our work rate. And the last parts of indicators are social indicators. When you get tired, people get grumpy. I am definitely one that happens too. Um, and that sometimes causes conflicts with others, because one word, one social cue, one physical sign, and it could create an argument. That has happened before, and it will lead to conflict with others, or withdrawal from social activities because I'm just not feeling it. Others would be, and the last one would be sort of the changes in work habits. As you start to overwork, you're going to have a very difficult time disassociating yourself from the work that you're doing. And that is typical in most high performance staff members. They just can't let it go. And as managers, as well as spouses, you need to really look at and see if, hey, are you missing all of your meals today just so that you can finish up the last log that you're analyzing? Are you skipping out on going to bed today because you have to process another hard drive? Um, Sometimes, like I said, staff members, individuals, they just want to push through and power through things. And that is not ideal because it will increase stress and it will lead to burnout. So, what can we do to protect ourselves, to make ourselves better and try to get away from the right side of that curve? Well, there are 5 strategies that I like to share with you today. First one is self care. Second one is hacking health. And I can tell you that we have a lot of industry folks here that are 100% promoting that. Third one is maintain a good work life balance. And this requires your organizations to be part of this. And in some cases, it is their responsibility. So you have to work with them and they have to work with you. Fourth one is building a support network around yourself that will help you gain the capacity and to increase your sustainable best. And last but not least, relaxation techniques that help you deal with the current situation. And I can tell you that I have used some of these techniques, and some of them are as simple as literally breathing deeply into a bag. And it does help, as silly as it sounds. So, self care techniques. Well, I mean, some of this seems very straightforward, but one is you need to understand, you need to identify that you're suffering from stress first and foremost. And you need to be aware of your own stress levels to get to a problem. Second part is there are some things that you could do to prevent burnout. So you need to take proactive steps. Um, we need to then establish routine because let's be honest, as human beings, we love routine. And routine really helps us deal with things that come out of the ordinary. So the more routine we have, the less surprises we have. The less surprises we have, the easier it is for us to build capacity to deal with other things that come up. And so the 1-3-5 rule or the 80-20 rule really comes into play where 80% of your day is regulated routine and 20% of it could be emergencies, and that will give you the capacity to deal with some issues, additional issues, that is. I would like to also tell people to kind of practice mindfulness. There is a whole slide on this one, but deep breathing I find is really helpful, especially when you're dealing with a stressful situation. So just take 1 second, take a deep breath, and then breathe out, and it will help you think about what you're going to do next, think about the strategies for the next little while. And if you have already a healthy lifestyle, that actually provides additional capacity for you to take on extra work or extra stressors in your life. But if you do not already have a healthy lifestyle, it will actually exacerbate the problem at hand. There is a technique to help us take regular breaks The Pomodoro technique has actually been implemented in some pieces of software, and I can tell you that some of the forensic software have introduced some of this technique into the software for officer care. And what this technique does is basically this: when you choose or select a task that you work on, set a timer. Say, for example, set a timer for 25 minutes, and this is the traditional technique. When that timer goes off, right, you can basically, sorry, when the timer is on, you're basically focusing on the task at hand. Once the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break. Whether the 25 minutes is good for your own self, that's up to you. You can extend it, you can shorten it. Some folks that I work with like to extend the 25 minutes to 2 hours, for example, because it takes, say, 2 hours to process a hard drive. So during that time, they're working. Once that alarm goes off, they're off on a break. Software can do that for you. Your phones can be programmed to do that for you as well. So I highly recommend people look at using technology to regulate your breaks and to build that routine in there, as I had mentioned earlier. The next one is to obviously schedule your time off and vacation so that you can recharge. You have to disassociate yourself from work responsibility. You got to disconnect. I am guilty of this. I have always not taken my vacations until the very last minute. So I can tell you that from my own experience, it's something that I really try to remind people to do because I personally in the past have not done so. And last but not least, if you can maintain and nurture good relationships with your friends and families and colleagues, the reason for that is that you need that social support. You have to build this network so that if and when there's an anomaly in your behaviors, they are typically are the first to notice it, and they typically are the first to raise the red flag around you. And if it comes from family members, that alert, that notification isn't as harsh as if a medical professional tells you that you've got a problem. So it's better to have the early detection than to wait till the very last minute when things are starting to fall apart and you're too far to the right, that it becomes a serious issue. Next, I want to talk about hacking health. Now, in our industry, there has been a lot of groups and movement towards hacking health, and so these are actually, very fun events if you've got the time. And I feel like you do need to specify and build the time to do this and dedicate the time to do this. And it can be as simple as basically choosing an exercise that you like to do. Things like walking, for example. So instead of, I don't know, playing an extreme sport, I can opt to take a 15-minute walk around my office building because I enjoy taking a walk and it relaxes me and I'm not thinking about work during the time that I'm taking this walk. Um, Other areas that you should also think about is what is the intensity level? So regular moderated exercise is typically more beneficial for stress management than the occasional very, very intense workouts. So again, back to that routine, build the regular exercise into your health routine so that you can really reduce the stress levels. And last but not least, simple one is just listen to your body, right? So if you overdo things, you're actually creating more stress for yourself. Say, for example, you did an intense workout and you injure yourself, and the next day you have to respond to an IR. You're not doing yourself a service. Last but not least, squat up. Again, think about building that support network. So there are groups out there that promote this, such as Blue Team Fit, Defer Fit. Even here at DEF CON, the DEF CON run was done, I think, a couple of mornings ago. And just today on the conference floor, I bumped into a new group, or at least a new group to me, which is the Hacking Your Health group, and their website is hackingyourhealth.com. So again, there are many groups out there that promote this, and I think the best notable in our industry for this is Hacking Dave, and he posts a lot about his workouts and how he hacks health while running a cybersecurity company. Highly recommend that you follow him and you look at the things that he's been doing. And last but not least, post your successes. Hey, I've done a workout today. I ran 2 miles on the treadmill. I've taken a 15-minute walk. Post it. Revel in your success. Like we need the achievements to lower our stress levels. Work-life balance. I feel like we talk about work-life balance a lot, and this one is again, pretty straightforward. Um, we do need to look at marrying what organizations are responsible for and keeping our organizations honest. So, as an employee, absolutely, you got to start setting work limits, if possible, within your environment. Make sure there are clear boundaries. One really good one is cell phones. I personally force my company to always pay for a work phone, and my personal phone is my personal phone. What I do is for work, if I am on call, I would have the phone on. If I'm not on call, it stays off. And that way, if anybody needs to reach me, I have processes in place to say, call my second in command. You're not talking to me. You're talking to the other individuals that is on call. And learn to say no. I feel like as high performance individuals, learning to say no is difficult for us. But you really have to protect your time and your energy, and you got to decline things. I've talked to my bosses in the past where I say, do we really need to take on this case? Most of our team is already engaged on an engagement. If we add this to them, we have no capacity to deal with other emergencies that may arise. So again, back to that 80 to 20% rule. Effectively, I'm telling my boss we are at 80. If you want us to take on anything else, there's a chance that if something comes sideways at us, we have no capability to deal with. Plan your day, start to look at routines, right? Use calendars, use task management applications. There are tons of these things out there now that effectively can schedule all 8 hours of your day very easily. And if you start seeing things start to overflow from those, you're stretched. Um, Always look at setting long-term and short-term goals, both for your work and personal life. I typically have weekly meetings with my staff members to look at the short-term goals, things that we can win very easily, and as well as long-term projects and goals to try to keep things organized and in a routine so that we're not getting things coming out of the woodwork and scaring us or having emergency work for no apparent reason. Try to schedule it as far ahead as we can. Communications, obviously, you do need to communicate all of these things. If you don't feel like you're capable of doing the work, let the managers know, let your organization know, so they can provide you the adequate training to be able for you to do the job. Supports such as the EAP programs and the wellness initiatives. I hope companies are providing those to their employees because that's very key. There's many times where I would utilize some of these programs so that I can seek medical or psychological help. And so those are very important programs. And I 100% want to make sure that you check out what you're entitled for within your organization's benefit plans. The last two here are really from my own personal experience. Dealing with digital forensics and response, perfection is something that we do strive for. However, it may be unrealistic, or at least we may set unrealistic standards for yourself. So really set achievable goals and then try to avoid things that you cannot achieve. Next, try to simplify your life. If you have a singular task, singular goal, try to focus on those. too often, I find folks try to multitask or juggle a number of different things at the same time, and those tend to fall apart pretty quickly. Now, not to say that you can't multitask. I've seen some folks do it very well. This is just coming from myself. I'm not a good multitasker. The next one is to really build a support network. So you really need to identify key members who are supporters of yourselves, allies of yourselves. I find that family really helps in this particular case. As you can see on the right here, from a quote from John Sullivan, his kids were his first indicator when, they notified him that, hey, you're grumpy, and the first thing he did was unplug. That said, like I said, there is other folks that will support you, friends, colleagues. They typically are the first to notice things off about you, and they will tell you in a nice way. Open communication. So try to be as open and honest and transparent with your peers and your friends and your family members. If you don't tell them that you're feeling down, it's a lot harder for them to get you help. Participate in professional networks. So join associations like DEF CON groups. If you're not feeling well, feel free to talk to somebody there. The rest, I think, are pretty straightforward. So take a look at regular check-ins, look at your company's EAP programs, seek professional help if you're feeling like you're on the right-hand side of those curves. If you need counseling or therapy, I highly recommend that you seek those professionals out and get a professional assessment. Last but not least, talk to a career coach. Maybe there is something in your personal life or maybe your career that could require some adjusting in order for you to manage and reduce your stress levels. This is the last part of my presentation. I find these work really well for me, especially when I'm in the middle of a 12 to 18-hour day. I'm on calls with government officials, everything's on fire, or hospital CEOs. Breathing exercises is huge for me. Taking a big breath and then breathing out slowly and just thinking about what to do next is one that I find very, very useful. Another one is the progressive massage relaxation technique. What it means is I'm tensing all the muscles, typically in my shoulder and my neck. I tense it really, really hard, and then I relax them. And I do that for about 10 times. And after I've done that, it seems to bring my stress levels down. Meditation, not thinking about work, thinking about maybe my last vacation, visualizing that vacation also helps me not think about the stress that I have to deal with at work. Yoga is a pretty straightforward one. I've been dragged to yoga many times by HR folks. I find it very helpful just to be at those classes and not think about work. Self-massage, I have a Theragun. I use it often. If you're sitting in front of a computer staring at a screen, I guarantee you your arms and your shoulders hurt a lot. You might want to use that. It's awesome. Aromatherapy, my wife has introduced me to this. Lavender is awesome. And if you've got one of those little machines that puff out the steam as well as the lavender smells, amazing. That basically concludes my presentation for today. If there are any questions, I am available. But before I go, I will leave you with some external resources. The self-care checklist is attached and on the side of this stage. Feel free to download it and use it for yourself. Now, why are we not using some resources that are already available to us? Well, I don't know why our industry doesn't do that, but you can take a look at what first responders, such as paramedics, firefighters, have already in place. So the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration actually has a guide to managing stress for those types of first responders. We can learn lessons from their guide. That said, the Canadian Red Cross and the Canadian Mental Health Association have a number of indexes and quizzes that you could utilize to gauge and identify your stresses. Again, if you can identify your stress, you can then plan and manage it. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I am around to answer them.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. For those who might want those slides, where they're posted is right here on this wall. Uh, the wall to my right here on the side of the wall, there's three documents there you can click on and view and download them if you'd like. Any questions for our speakers?
Quick question. In your research, have you come across any statistics on drug and alcohol abuse as it relates to incident responders?
So here's an interesting one. We actually haven't had a chance to collect statistics and evidence for digital forensics and incident response personnel. Now, if you look at the first responder groups, such as police, fire, they actually do collect that. Now, here's my challenge to you for the industry. We really do need to have that sort of industry statistic and metrics for us to be able to better deal with this situation that we have. Because I can tell you that once we start getting those numbers, it may be quite alarming.
I'm curious if there's any initiative to help the general public as we become more and more dependent upon technology in our daily lives. Are we looking at the impact these, cyber crimes and incidents and outages have on the general public, especially our young folks?
Oh, good question. I think the impacts haven't crossed into the general public just yet. I think they are secondary impacts. The main impact would be to the direct organization that have been hit by or that have suffered the cybercrime. So the most direct one would be obviously the financial impact. So say, for example, if you ransomwared if the bad guys ransomwared a financial institution.
Right. I'm thinking, generalized anxiety about, is the hospital system going to fail? Is 911 going to fail again? Are we looking at the impact of when 911 goes down? How does that affect our community? Are we offering resources? Are we addressing that? Are we allowing it to be one of those, I believe you talked about kind of like suppressed stress? Are we paying attention to that and monitoring it?
So it's an interesting question you asked because in Canada, we actually did have a 911 outage. It wasn't a cyber attack. It was actually an IT issue, but 911 services was offline to Canadians across the country. And yes, it does increase the stress levels. In fact, it created some issues for people who were needing those services. Do we have, like I said, research and statistics on it? I don't know. I don't believe there is any that has been captured, but the impact of that outage was very significant.
Thank you. I hope we consider things like that in the future and, put forth resources into that type of research, because as we become more dependent upon it, it's, it is impacting our lives when systems fail.
I 100% agree with you. And, having talks like this is really to raise that awareness. And we need to all collectively start asking questions to our government agencies, hey, are we doing this and are we doing this right?
Our next speaker will be up in about 15 minutes.
A bunch of wonderful topics. Wow, I'm like bedazzled over here.
Yeah, and if there's any sections that you missed or would like to, be able to pause and fast forward and rewind, this is available on YouTube. So this entire event is streamed to YouTube, and you can watch it there.
Just thinking on that a little more, talking about the economic impact of the stress and anxiety that, we'll just say tech situations or tech outages in general can cause. It really is and not talked about enough in when we look at things like attrition and losing employees and such, and how often, our tech issues are relating to that kind of mental fatigue. But it really is very interesting. I appreciate you having a talk about it. It is something that we need to encourage people to think more on.
Yeah, and I think there needs to be more research on this. My ultimate goal here is to try to get not just government agencies. I feel like government agencies can't really help us with this. I feel like the industry itself has to come together and look at perhaps putting together a framework for us to work on. And if the framework is successful, it may turn into a standard. Like let's be honest, there are so many frameworks out there in cybersecurity. We should have one that basically says, let's look at stress reduction, let's look at burnout prevention frameworks so that we can save our staff members. Because let's be honest, without our people, we can't make money.
Very
I have a
true.
question also.
Oh,
I'm
go
glad
ahead.
someone finally admitted that.
Hey, you're done?
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the mindfulness and staying calm and everything. What happens to someone who's located in a country who's at a war, sorry. Just feeling that the major anxiety over something you can't really control. How can you maintain balance in that situation? If you have any thoughts.
Ooh, that's a tough question.
Yeah, I know. Sorry,
I'm
just relevant.
no, it's good. It's good. I actually have a friend. He's Ukrainian, and
Yeah, exactly. I'm talking about situations like that.
he's got
With all the
similar.
bombings and everything, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So how do you make long-term plans when you don't know if you're going to lose your legs tomorrow or something? I don't know.
No, I 100% agree with you, and I feel like if you have an employee that has either family members or are impacted by war, I would say that you should try to be closer to them, be part of their support network. Um, if you start seeing things or their behavior change, like reach out to them and find out. I mean, you could find out that, hey, they just found out some bad news, from their country that maybe a family member got killed, and you should just be there for them.
Our heart definitely
Like
goes out to everyone struggling in war. Um, sorry, someone else was speaking. I didn't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
no, I just wanted to say like it's one of the most like simplest answers you can think of, but there's probably nothing more helpful than that. Just lending an ear and I guess a shoulder.
Yeah, and humans are complex, but I feel like there are some simple solutions, such as being part of their support structure, just being there for them. And if you're the employer, for example, look at providing them some assistance in terms of time off or long-term disability, that sort of thing, so that they can go and potentially deal with the issues at hand, such as seeking medical help or psychosocial help.
Okay, thank you.
From a research perspective, do we have any data on, I don't know about y'all, but I work in tech, I work from home. We are dependent upon a number of tools. Anytime there's a tool outage and it affects my employees' ability to do their job, it's a high stress environment. I would love to see those protocols you were talking about and research on developing skills and techniques to help us in management be able to, offer the employees some relief during these periods of time. Because of course we're building bridges, we're doing everything we can to get these tools back online, but it is highly stressful, and we probably should have some procedures in place to help them deal with the stress of it as well.
Yeah, I find that. So, for example, when we looked at what happened with CrowdStrike, when IT teams, were working around the clock to restore some of these systems, um, if you have the capacity of people, for example, you're able to rotate teams out. That's probably the most ideal. But if you don't have that particular capacity, then look at either bringing additional or third party help in at a moment's notice. Again, a lot of this requires preparation, right? And that's one of the topics here as well, is to kind of build that capacity ahead of time, be a bit more prepared by having some of these support structures in place before you have an emergency, and try not to overload your team already. So try to keep them at 80% as opposed to 100%. I talk about these like as in like, they seem like luxuries, but if we plan ahead and do things right, then we should be at that point. But I understand that, emergencies, things come out of us from the side. Um, yeah, when technology like CrowdStrike happens, it's definitely a huge stressor. My team, for example, worked around the clock to get things done, and yeah, I, other than having additional staff members or bringing in third-party help, yeah, I'm not sure how management can deal with that in a more effective way.
Right. And my concerns are also not just for my IT tech team that's dealing with it head on, but employees in other sectors that are being affected. They're not being able to do their job. They may not be directly responsible or directly be able to even assist, but we need something to help combat their level of stress because they're unable to utilize a tool that they needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, it's a tough question. I, I don't know. I don't quite have the full answer for you. And like I said, this could be things that we continue our discussion on and try to find the answer for.
Well, I appreciate your bringing awareness to the subject, and hopefully we will be able to, move forward with progress in that area.
I'm hoping that maybe in a year or two you can do a follow-up talk and tell us about all the improvements that have been made in the industry, or positive one. Thank you.
Mhm. That's a good follow-up. Thank you.